Today, in the next instalment in our Ambassador series, we're joined by our first ambassador from Latin America, Brett Hackett from Brazil. Brett, thanks for joining us today.
It's good to be back, Tom.
Brett, how would you characterise the current state of the bilateral relationship with Brazil?
Historically, the relationship between Australia and Brazil has been a good one. It's been characterised by considerable cooperation in multilateral forums. We, for example, were founding members of the CANS group of International Agricultural Free Traders. We've worked very closely in a number of disarmament fora, and indeed we've incorporated considerably in environmental issues. We're in lockstep, for example, in our efforts to protect whales. We are mega diverse countries and have an interest in protecting global biodiversity, and increasingly our views converge on climate change. It's fair to say, I think, though, that our relationship in a multilateral sense has outstripped our bilateral engagement. In part, that's a function simply of geography. We have always perceived Brazil as literally being half a world away. In recent years, however, I think both sides have realised that there is considerable potential to expand on bilateral cooperation. The first clear sign of that was in our agreement on an enhanced partnership memorandum of understanding in 2010. That set a few benchmarks, I think, for both sides to take the relationship forward. And certainly, subsequent to that agreement, we saw an intensification of ministerial contact, both in the margins of international meetings, but then in the highly successful visit of Dr. Emerson to Brazil in April of this year, and culminating in the Prime Minister's visit to Brazil in June, which incidentally was the first visit by a sitting Australian Prime Minister to Brazil. One of the landmark outcomes of that visit was an agreement on a strategic partnership, which now will set a path for engagement in the years to come.
And what benefits will a strategic partnership deliver?
Well, I'd like to say at the outset that it's not just a theoretical document. Of course, it's based on our shared traditions of democracy and our shared values and our shared commitment to the global well-being. But it also sets out a number of very practical steps that we can take to avail ourselves, if you like, of our individual expertise and experience in our respective regions. For example, the agreement commits both sides to working to expand bilateral trade and investment. It commits both sides to identifying opportunities to partner in development cooperation in third countries. It commits both sides to enhanced, diversified and strategic dialogue on a number of issues which are, of course, of pressing concern. We are, for example, both members of the G20, and the strategic partnership commits both Brazil and Australia to working hard to improve global economic governance. But just as importantly as the things that are most immediately apparent, the strategic partnership also serves to identify areas where we could and should be doing better bilaterally. My personal view is that education cooperation is at the forefront of that. There are roughly 15,000 Brazilian students who are currently studying in Australia, but we can do much better than that. There's an absolute thirst on the part of Brazilian students for global educational qualifications, and indeed the Brazilian economy has a number of skill shortages where we are very well placed to take up the slack. We are very encouraged, I think, by the level of interest that is currently being shown by Australian educational institutions, not only in attracting an increased number of Brazilian students, but also in developing institutional links between the two countries. That, of course, will serve to lay a very healthy platform for future research and development collaboration, but also serving to expand the knowledge base of both countries about each other. Importantly, there is also an absolute interest on the part of Brazilian institutions to attract an increasing number of Australian researchers to undertake research and collaboration in Brazil itself, and some very encouraging signs that the Brazilian education sector in general is opening itself up very much to global influences and global engagement.
On the face of it, Australia and Brazil would appear to be pretty similar, both big exporters of energy, of agriculture, both big growing economies. Would you describe us as natural partners or natural competitors?
Well, it's true to say that many of the strengths of the Australian economy and many of the strengths of the Brazilian economy are the same. And as a result, occasionally we'll find ourselves pitted in competition in international markets. But the fact that there is such commonality also gives us many shared interests. We have, for example, an interest in global economic governance. As exporting nations, we have an interest in ensuring that markets remain open, that the global economy remains healthy to enable our export industries to compete. There's also a significant opportunity to promote research and development and collaboration in areas of mutual interest. Brazilians often remark to me that they think that there's enormous potential for Australia and Brazil to collaborate more closely in biotechnology, in agriculture, in medicine in general, and tropical medicine in particular. That provides us with an enormous opportunity to work together with Brazil. But also because of our shared interests and the building understanding of each other's economies in our respective countries, enormous growth in investment. Australian mining companies were at the forefront of our push into Brazil, as they often are. They bring to the table enormous expertise in exploiting mineral deposits in very diverse terrain, often in isolated areas, and doing so in a very sustainable way. Their entry into the Brazilian market was followed quite closely by our mining services and related services companies. But in recent years, we've seen rapid diversification in the investment world. For example, Australian companies are now increasingly involved in the Brazilian retail sector. Our Australian companies are even forging a niche role for themselves in Brazilian manufacturing. And ultimately, the establishment and enhancement and rapid growth in those investment links and the increasing interconnectedness of our two economies will far outweigh the elements of competition that exist between us.
So Brett, Brazil's got an exciting few years coming up with the World Cup and the Olympics. What are the major challenges Brazil faces as it gets ready to host these major events?
I think if anybody ever needed any evidence that Brazil has emerged on the world stage, one only has to look at the rather significant agenda it has set for itself over the next 5 years. Arguably, the first of these major events has already happened, the Rio +20 Earth Summit, which Brazil successfully hosted in June of 2012. Next year, Brazil will host World Youth Day in Rio. Following that, it will host the World Cup across the country in 2014. There will be a number of major significant sporting events in 2015, culminating in the Rio Olympics in 2016. There are obviously opportunities for Australian individuals and companies who have a demonstrated track record in the staging of major events. We are quite good at that and have a demonstrated track record in that. But I think that also this series of events is really going to attract the attention of the Australian public. We expect that Australians in increasing numbers will travel to Brazil over the next 4 or 5 years, and that is, by any stretch of the imagination, a great thing. But that said, any successful visit overseas requires a little bit of planning on the part of Australians. The Smart Traveller website is an invaluable tool for any Australian who's looking to travel overseas, and it contains a lot of great general advice. But it also contains some very specific advice for Australians who are thinking of travelling to Brazil. And I would encourage any Australian who is thinking of participating as a spectator in any of these major events to have a look at the Smart Traveller website. Certainly the Embassy and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade accords the highest priority to ensuring that the information on that website is current and is of maximum use. And we will be updating on a regular basis the content of the website to ensure that Australian travellers can undertake travel to Brazil very happily and hopefully without incident.
Thanks, Brett, and let's hope Australia is there for the 2014 Football World Cup.
Well, we've had a good night overnight, haven't we? Yes.
Okay, Brett Hackett, thanks for joining us on our Ambassadors.
Thank you very much, Tom.
And that was Brett Hackett, Australia's ambassador to Brazil.